Chris Yin, co-founder and CEO of Plume Network. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me today, Peter. Appreciate it and looking forward to getting into it.
Before we begin, I just want to share my condolences about Eugene, your co-founder that passed recently. It's not often something like that happens to a startup, and so I just want to offer my condolences.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. I mean, look, he's one of my co-founders and a key part of Plume and everything we built so far. But I think we've been grateful that we have such a strong team and a great team to kind of jump in and fill in and just get back to it. And I think we've been grateful to have a bunch of people step up and everything. So I think we're proud of what we've done so far, and I think it's been great
That's awesome.
to have things keep going. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
You bet. I want to begin with your bio on your Twitter. It says you're a door-to-door RWA FI salesman. I love that because I actually think every young person needs to learn how to sell door to door, because it teaches you so much. And so I want to hear about why you describe yourself as that, and then we'll get into Plume.
Totally. Look, I think like you said, right? Every founder, and I think every real executive, to be honest, outside of the founder, is a salesperson. Like you're shilling no matter what, right? And whether it's to investors, whether it's to users, whether it's to LPs, we're always selling something, And so I think that's part of it. And I think, to me, the statement on door to door, one, I think I've done door to door sales as a kid, and I think it sounds like some of you too are like, people have, and like, I think the beautiful thing about door to door sales is there's just it's a game of like sort of energy and velocity and volume, which is like, it's less targeted, than perhaps something super narrow, right? You're just going out and banging the doors and just getting everyone to aware and like going out there, and you got to go from one thing to the other. And you're probably going to get 99% of the people to tell you to leave, and like they have no interest, but you can eventually hook somebody. And when you do, it's awesome, And I feel like it's a statement for us, to me at least, about where the market is for RWAs today, right? Which is, I often find that I'm doing kind of like, hey, have you heard of the good Lord? Like that kind of stuff to like the RWA audience, and like I'm like the Jehovah's Witness passing out pamphlets, and getting people to understand what's going on, and because we are like real believers that this is a thing, and I think people are okay, I've heard of it, I don't really know what's going on, but like it seems like it makes sense to me. I see a bunch of big logos and names and stuff, but what's going on? And so I think it's really a lot of like evangelizing. It's a lot of getting people to understand. It's a lot of like a lot of that. And so I think it's sort of like high velocity, high volume, I'm out there in the streets, relentlessly about it. And I think, it's very much like, I think we need to get a lot of people into the bus, in so many words, and that's how we do it. It's just, sort of broad based, I'll hit everybody out there and talk to anyone, anytime about it, and to make it work. So that's how I think about it and why I phrase it that way.
No, I love it. I think every person should learn how to sell door to door. And in fact, I want to even go further. I think every young person needs to learn how to work commission only. And like the lessons that will teach you are pretty amazing, because it puts everything together, right? You have to learn about the product that you're selling. You have to learn about how to sell. You have to learn about customer service. I mean, it's just the lessons are very broad, and can really teach someone how to grow up quickly.
100%. Nothing sharpens the stick like that, It's like, look, you're not getting fed unless you close the deal, It's like, all right, I'm gonna learn to close the deal then.
So. That's exactly right, and it's such an underappreciated skill, sales is in crypto, and
sure.
we definitely need more of that. Let's get into Plume. You've described Plume as the first modular L2 purpose built for real world assets. So a bunch of kind of buzzwords there. So maybe help describe what a real world asset is. I think the audience knows what layer 2s are, but maybe describe kind of like the architecture, not too technical, but kind of give us a sense of kind of like what Plume Network is built on, and kind of like what's underneath it.
Yep. So a couple things. Starting with RWAs, right? And we can get to things. So actually we have a lot of we have an L2, we've got a lot of stuff in the infrastructure. So we'll get to that in a second. But maybe starting with RWAs. What are RWAs and what are we doing here, right? I think of, like you said, RWAs, any 3-letter acronym is bound to be a useless term. Right. And that's kind of where it's happened, unfortunately, for RWAs, right? And that's kind of where we are today, right? I think people don't know what it means. People sort of hear buzzwords. They hear BlackRock, they hear Larry Fink, they hear this, the numbers, blah, 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 right? And things going up, T-bills, right? I think the thing that matters the most for RWAs and the thing that we think about is how do we make it easy to interact with the real world on chain, right? And our view has always started with this. It started with a more crypto native perspective. I think a lot of people come to this from an academic point of view, which is, if you look at assets today and the sort of way things flow in the real world, right, you could sort of solve a lot of these problems around coordination and all these things, right, with the blockchain. Right, which I think it makes sense, and I get it, and I think it is true, right? But we came at this more from an end user view, right? Which is, look, like we prefer, and I've always loved how to do things on chain and what to do here, right? You click around and you make things work. You're interacting with people all over the world, right? It's permissionless, open. People are just sort of building things without having to think about them, right? And have to get permission, right? I've always loved the sort of open innovation around these things, right? The composability, but we're limited by what we could do. So we wanted to get into the real world, right? And bring more of that type of stuff. And the added benefit is you bring lots of users and money and capital, all these kinds of things, right? And so that's where we started. And so when we think about RWAs today, right, what I think about is how do you interact with a real thing, something that has a physical tie, right, on the blockchain, right? And the simplest way that people manifest that is you take something physical and you tokenize it and you have a receipt that lives on chain, right? And so the classic example people use is something like, like a Pokemon card or like T-bills, right? Or when you're taking this thing and you mint a one-to-one representation, you put that on chain, right? For us, right, I think a little bit more broadly, right, in that, right? I think it's about interacting with anything in the real world, and that can be concepts, can be ideas, right? I think it's about touching things in the real world and allowing us to touch the real world through clicking buttons, right? And so that can be concepts, it can be ideas, it can be synthetic versions of different things, right? It doesn't have to be a physical version of X, Y, Z. So, for example, you could do um, like cultures, right? We have a protocol called Cultured, right? And I've said this about a bunch of times. Like Cultured allows you to sort of speculate on different aspects of culture, right? So if you're, for example, you think that sort of like broad sentiment for the U.S. is going up, and maybe the sentiment for like Australia is going down or something, right? You could like live long and live shorter, right? And what is that, right? The U.S. is not. We didn't tokenize America, what we did is you take a collection of data points and feeds about America, and you sort of weight them properly and turn them into a representation of what that is, right? So that's a synthetic version of America, right? And how you can now interact with that, right, on chain as well, right? And so that's kind of how I think about this, and I think it's you've seen this manifest in different ways, and so that's how we think about RWAs today. RWAs today, right, are a way in the blockchain world and in crypto to interact with different aspects of the real world. Click buttons and things in the real world happen and express your ideas about what's going on around you through the blockchain, right? Whereas other things, BTC, ETH, whatever, those are sort of crypto native assets and they live in their own little world, right? That's largely untethered. And so we want to bring those two things together, overlay them, mix and match, and have them live in one universe for us all to interact with. So I can bounce back and forth between holding staked ETH or BTC, right? Or then moving into, holding shares in a local restaurant down here. Or if I'm bullish on uranium, I think, nuclear is going up, I can just switch into that. Or if I want to switch into Fartcoin, because I think that's going to, I can rotate that. So just having this in a single playing field and a seamless experience going back and forth between all these different things, which is what people do today already. People already rotate between crypto and the real world, right? But the sort of the rails that do that are very, very painful and slow and complicated, right? And so what we're trying to do is just improve the user experience around what people are already doing. That's what I've always felt to make things happen, right? You sort of follow the user and make things better that way. So that's our view on it. So we have a tremendous amount of stuff on Blue today. It's tokenized assets, the classic way, right? Which is, we have things like T-bills, you have things like real estate, we have things like Pokemon cards, you have things like, privatized, tokenized funds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe like a private credit fund or something that you've tokenized and put it so someone can interact with that fund by buying it. But you also have concepts, right? And things like that. You have air rights, you have a sentiment, you have all kinds of things like that as well. And you mix and match those things together to create new things.
I think one of the challenges when people think of RWAs or real world assets on chain is that it's such a broad universe. And I think most people's brains kind of have to focus. And so I wonder about Plume, if you guys, your go to market, if you guys have approached kind of like have a domain specific approach or a vertical specific approach versus everything.
Yes, totally.
Maybe tell us about that.
Totally. I think you're totally right, by the way. Like, look, while I say everything, and we do have like virtually everything, the focus is not that, right? I see Plume as a broad ecosystem in which we want to let 1,000 flowers bloom and people can do whatever they want, right? And I think that's great, and that's how I want to keep it, right? That being said, right, I think the other side of it is we want to make sure that we apply our sort of go-to-market efforts around certain categories at the right times,
Hmm.
and where things are taking off, right, and where things are going. And so I think about this usually in terms of audience, right? Meaning, who are we serving? And starting there is what ends up being the things that we focus on right now, right? And if you look today, there's sort of two broad views in the RWA world, right? One is that we are exporting crypto, the blockchain, smart contracts, all of that over to the real world, right? We want people in the real world to interact with these things, right? And to utilize them and to get value out of them, right? That's one view, and I don't think it's a wrong view, right? But that's one. The other side is our view, which is where is the market today and what's happening right now? And I see the world of people on chain and what people are doing crypto as the on chain audience. So we focus on crypto natives as a starting point. Doesn't mean it's exclusively that. We work with plenty of trad folks, we work with Web2 people and all that, but we start with the crypto natives, right? Because I think they're here now and they're using and again, it's going back to how we started Plume. We thought life was better on chain and we prefer life on chain. So we want to build products that mimic that experience, right? And so we start here with people that are familiar with that. So that's where we started. So where does that actually lead to go to market wise? I think it leads to what do people on chain like to do today, right? That's the
Hmm.
question. And as that audience changes away from today, which is like farmers and degens and like, international folks, to then you get a broad swath of maybe normies or whatever coming in, the mix of things that they're going to want is also going to change. But today, what is it still? It's going to be yield farming, right? It's making money, right? It's trading, it's speculation, right? And it's also using leverage and derivatives, right? And that tends to be what we do today on chain. And so we find products and protocols and assets that fit those categories that have a similar feel and bring those today. What is that today, right? If you look at yield farming, it ends up being, right, one of the big things that this cycle that is going on is stable farming. People love holding stables and farming points and farming stable rewards, and T-bills are a whole thing. 5% turns out 5% is a lot of money. I think people in crypto sometimes forget that, when we see 10,000 APYs, that 5% in real cash is money. And so we find assets like that, so we work with T-bills, we work with, CLO providers, that's, 6.5%. We have private credit that's, 7, 8, 9, you have things like mineral rights, right? It's one of the more interesting ones, I think. We work with a company called Mineral Vault, right? And what they have is royalties on oil wells in America, right? And the beautiful thing about oil, right, and special oil wells is in Texas, they call it mailbox money, right? Because you own one, the money just comes in every month, right? Because it does one thing and one thing only, right? It turns oil into dollars, right? That's all it is, right? And so, being able to access that flow, and if you're bullish on oil, you can now just swap into this token. You can stake stables and get access to this thing, right? And now you're earning between 15 to 18% APY, right, on a very regular basis, paid out monthly. It's fully liquid. You can get in at any time. Right. So that's the story for these assets. I think a lot of our initial focus, which is what do people want on chain? What are the unique attributes of RWAs you can't get on chain? A lot of people say that yields on chain are better than off chain yields, right? And I think it's true for the most part, but it depends on two things: timing in the market, where things are, because when things are bad, they're bad. And number two is size, right? Most things in crypto is actually not that much size. So if you want to do real size in crypto, you can't really do it on chain in any safe way, right? And so you have to go off chain, right? And so that to me is where we are coming in. And that's also why RWA is important, because by bringing in off chain yields, I believe that economics drive everything, right? And behavior drives behavior. And so if you're bringing in off-chain yields, that's how we grow crypto reliably every single day, because we're constantly bringing in more money and more people and more users into this thing. And money and liquidity drives behavior, right? So that's our belief in our flow. So right now we focus on yield-bearing products that are simple, straightforward, right? And have a crypto feel, right? We can make them liquid. We can make them usable. We can make them composable, right? There are less of the onerous securities rules around them for now, right? And so you can make them more accessible, right? And think about the global audience for this type of stuff. So that's where we focus on today, but that will change over time as well. As more people
Yeah.
come in, we'll focus more on cards or, toys or real estate or whatever. But to me, it's easy things that you can rotate into.
Let's take one of these yield bearing products. You've established
Sure.
that that's initially the focus right now is yield bearing products. Let's take the mineral rights one.
Yep.
Maybe walk the user or the audience through like what it takes to put a mineral right on chain and
Totally.
how people can participate and benefit from that.
Yes, totally. So look, it's actually a very complicated thing, right? And the whole point of Plume and one of our key protocols, Nest, is to simplify that all down to 2 clicks, right? Now, the actual process of this. Now, let's take Mineral Vault. What is Mineral Vault? Mineral Vault, right, is a company. It's a fund, really, that owns a collection of, I think it's about 2,500 different oil producing wells in America, right? Mostly in Texas, but all over the place, right? So you've got a bunch of wells sitting there, and a company that owns the title and owns the deed, right, for that particular well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what they do now is they rent those out, right, to companies like Exxon and companies like, other companies that deal with oil, right, deal with extraction, deal with refining and all that kind of stuff, right, and get that ultimately to the end user, right? So they lease those out to people. And so for them, the reason why it's a good thing, right, is two things. One is you're doing less of the operational heavy work. Right, you're not actually mining yourself. You're not actually doing all this stuff. Right, it's heavy and it's hard work and it's a lot of operating costs. You really have to think about the operations of that business at that point. Right, number
Mm-hmm.
one. Number two is then looking at just purely royalties. Right, when you look purely at royalties, all you have to do is just lease it out. Right, and not only do you get a base payment, you get some upside in whatever comes in. Right, you take a small sliver of it. Right, and so that's what it is today. That's the fund at a very basic level. Right now, how do you tokenize that? Right, there are a bunch of different ways to do this, but the way that these guys have done it, at least, right, is what you're doing is taking a share of those funds. Right, a fund really is just like a company. Right, you have X number of shares. Let's just say 1,000 shares. Right, you take 20% of those, right, and you move them into a new entity. Right, a standalone SPV is an example. An SPV is a special purpose vehicle. Right, it's a
Mm-hmm.
special company designed just to hold those shares. Right, and then what you can do is you can then mint tokens 1-to-1 against those shares, or maybe 2-to-1, or whatever you define. Right, um, and then now this entity, the reason it's separate is now it's bankruptcy remote and protected. Right, and so there's no way to like have it mixed up and have it like, you just know that this legal entity, you can watch it just sit there and do nothing but house those shares. Right, and it should then tell you how many tokens are emitted out of that, and then those tokens get circulated to people within crypto. Right, and then from there, because those shares own shares of the fund on a regular basis, let's call it in this case monthly. Right, when those royalty checks come in, if you've got 20% of the shares here, 20% of the royalties go into a bank account controlled by
Mm-hmm.
this entity, right? And it holds there like a treasury. And then the yields that come out get minted against that as well, right? And so you can constantly see how the flow from the off-chain world goes into a special purpose vehicle, right, that then emits tokens as receipts for people off-chain, on-chain to use, right? And so then you can redeem them for the underlying. You can then buy them and take the stables out, whatever you want, or whatever you want to do with it. But that's the idea behind how this actually works. As an end user in crypto, today there's a couple ways to do it. There's two ways to do anything, right? One is if you want to actually own the underlying shares, right? And to do that, you need to KYC, you need to do all kinds of onerous stuff. And it feels very much like a trad experience, right? Like you have to go fill out a bunch of paperwork, you got to wait 2 weeks, you got to do this, you got to hold the phone up and like take a picture of your passport. It's the whole thing, right? And usually you're gated by a bunch of things. You need to be a accredited investor, which is 200K minimum, right, in annual salary, right? Or you need to hold, $1 million liquid, or sometimes it asks you to be QP'd, qualified purchaser, which is a $5 million liquid balance in a bank account somewhere. Right? It's a very restrictive and prohibitive to most people, right? And so what we can also do is through Nest is the other way, which is you can own the economic interest without owning the underlying, right? Which means you can mint a receipt token against that. It's very much DAI and SDAI, right? Like now you can hold a version of this token and get the yield from it, right, on a regular basis without having to do all the nonsense, you know? So that's kind of the idea. So as an end user, what we're trying to do is mimic the end user experience in crypto. If you want to do anything today, you go to a swap, right? You copy a contract address, right? If you're good, you maybe go to Token Sniffer, make sure it's not a rug, right? And then you go to an AMM, you put in the contract address, you hit the same thing, right? There's a to and a from, you swap and you're in and out. You're good to go. Now you hold that token, right? We're trying to make that experience for RWAs, whereas today it's this whole process behind the scenes, setting the entity up, the whole thing, KYCing, QPing, blah, blah, blah. It takes months to do that, right?
Yeah.
What we've done is taken that entire thing, abstracted it away. So now as an end user, you can go to Nest, right? And you can literally go and see the mineral vault, right? And then decide to say, look, I'm going to take, 10 stables, $10, stake it in here, and I'll get $10 worth of mineral tokens back. And then every
Yeah.
single month, I'm now accruing yield against that coming from a button. So I've clicked one button, and now I own a share, and I'm getting money from an oil well somewhere in Texas. So that's kind of the idea. It's to use cryptography, to use crypto, to use these different structures to create a trust and a provable way to access these things through just clicking buttons. Does that make
Got it.
sense?
Yeah. So I'm envisioning really a two-sided market. On the one side, you've got kind of like the tokenizing operations, which is really a very complicated process, which is includes operations, legal, etc. And then there's to get the tokenized assets on chain, which includes creating an SPV for it. And then on the other side, you've got people that want to trade those assets. Is that about right? When I
That's
think
right.
of Plume, okay.
That's right.
Um, that's very, very interesting. I've talked to other projects in the RWA space, and they really run the gamut from uh, tokenizing like physical stuff, and then but they don't quite get into the trading.
Right.
Um, and then there's some that tokenize physical stuff like life insurance, and then they create some kind of tokenized version of it that becomes tradable. I met
Right.
with a project called Allo.xyz, and they're very interesting because they have SPVs for everything, and then you can then invest in the SPV. And one of the more interesting use cases that they had an SPV for was they created a special purpose vehicle. They tokenized it, and then people could invest in it. And the primary purpose of that SPV was to buy really, really old olive trees in Israel. Um, I'm curious if you've seen anything like that for Plume, like just really unique
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
totally. We have
tokenized
all kinds
assets.
of yes, all kinds of stuff. I mean, two things I think that always come to mind that I talk about.
Yeah.
Um, Number one is camels. I use this one a lot just because it's more esoteric. But camel farming is a whole thing. You know, um, camels. It turns out there's like a yield on camels too, right? Both from milk, but like racing and stuff like that. And so, like, anyway, we've seen this thing where, like, you can access and hold a portion of a camel token, right? That sort of represents a share of a camel farm. You can even go down to the individual camel, and then again, there's different yields based on like their race and the person they're getting, and then also different things they're producing. So there's all kinds of stuff around camel farming. That's like one thing that we didn't really get into before. That's one that I think is kind of interesting. Number two is durians. There's a Data Durian is another project. Data Durian is they do durian farms,
Oh
and
wow.
uh, and durians are apparently highly profitable, and and so like they work very well, and pretty straightforward, and it's not something easy to get access to. So if you're just like bullish durians, I don't even know how you get exposure to that today. But now through Plume and through these things, you push a button and get access to a durian farm and hold a share in that thing, right? Same thing with camels. If you were just like, look, I just think camels are the next horse, or whatever it might be, or maybe they already
Yeah.
are. Now you can hold a part of that, or you think, look, camel racing is a thing. I want to get into some of the action, you can't, So like, there's a bunch of stuff like that that's like super esoteric that I always love talking about because it's just hilarious, and I think it's also like you just learn so much about other things that you never had, never knew before,
Yeah.
So definitely.
I can think of so many. I mean, the durian farm example is super interesting, and I was thinking of a joke to make about durians, but it escaped me. But anyway, um, let's talk about the architecture of Plume.
Yes.
You guys, I think it's been described somewhere that it's a modular layer 2, but maybe if you can explain that for
Yes,
us,
totally. So
or if I get that wrong.
no, no. So the story's evolved over time, and we continue to add to it, right? As we discover new things in the market, we continue to add. So today, there's multiple parts of Plume, right? The initial piece is a mod is an L2. Yes, it's an Arbitrum based L2, right? We sell down to Celestia. It's a whole thing, right? The classic way of doing things, and it's our execution layer, right? In tandem, we've also built an L1
Mm,
that we have not fully like released yet, right? It's in a private testnet right now that we're working on, and there's a bunch of reasons as to how that works. But the idea is to sort of, it really is two things. One is there are a lot of things that are inherent and custom to RWAs that need a lot of need a lot of customization for, right? If you look at things like compliance, you look at things like KYC, and to do these things in an actual trustless, right, and a decentralized way is a thing that hasn't been done before. If you look at Tether, the biggest RWAs are stablecoins. So if you look at Tether, you look at Circle, these are centralized operations today. They are not decentralized products, right? If you look at things, most of RWAs is fetching something from the real world and bringing it on chain,
mhm,
right? Which involves a tremendous amount of coordination and trust, right? And today, so we lean on big names to be sure, right? That's why you lean on BlackRock, right, to sell you the T-bill fund because they're probably not going to rug you, right? But they could anytime. The truth is, you'd never know, right? Today, and so how do you coordinate this stuff? And so it's the integration of the token and the network and all kinds of stuff.
mhm.
You know, um, that to me is what the focus is, and how we have this L1 is coming to play as well. We'll share more about that in the upcoming months, right? Because our view has always been very simple, right? We think life is better on chain, and we want to grow crypto, right? I think most ecosystems and networks are really focused on growing themselves, and our view is that we want to grow all of crypto, and ideally, if we do that, Plume grows as well. Right. And so that's why we're very interested in building this architecture in a modular way that allows other networks to use them. Right.
Yeah.
I think we're one of the few networks, if not the only one, that are very interested and focused on working with lots of networks. We're close with a bunch of teams. So we're one of the only chains, I think, in the beginning to come out with like a bridging product, right, with partnership with Layer Zero to do something we call Skylink, and allows us to sort of bridge these yields to different ecosystems. So Solana, Injective, I think over 70 different chains. We have another 15, right, in the pipeline. We haven't announced yet, but like we've got a bunch of them that are coming together, right, for this reason, and it's to make it easy to access everywhere. Right. And so part of that architecture is the L1 as well, to kind of put these two things together so people can not only access the underlying services, but actually get access to the assets as well in the use cases, right? And packaging up in a way for people to get. If you are, if you are just deep in the Solana ecosystem, right? There's no point for me to try and take them and bring them to Plume. You should stay there and do your thing. And if you want to be, now let me bring it to you. And let's also do it in a way where Solana gets the value. They can get the TV, they get the, that's fine with me, right? Again, we want to grow crypto, right? And that's the point. And I think, too much of crypto today is people fighting over the same 10,000 users, or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
We're very focused on the entirety of the world and bringing everyone else on. And so if we could be the front door, bring people in and they come to Plume and they stay here, great, God bless, right? And if we want to come in and bring them everywhere else, that's okay with me too. Like to me, it's about just really greasing the tires and making it easy. And I'm a big believer that this is one of the few areas that's a very, very net positive, right? Versus zero sum. Right. And so that's our focus and how we think about the architecture for what we're building. Right. It's to serve this larger purpose. Right. And to serve all ecosystems and not just us. And it requires the coordination of the L1, the execution environment, the L2, and allowing this asset to flow around many places while still providing the security and guarantees of crypto today. So a lot more to come on that, and we'll share more in the upcoming months. But we have multiple environments that's, I think, not as clear as it should be to the market, but multiple environments that we interact with today.
Yeah. It sounds like, as currently as a layer 2, you've kind of hit some bottlenecks or constraints, and which is leading you to think maybe like having our own L1 could better serve the customer. And especially as we grow and work with other ecosystems, this layer 1 might be the better architecture for that.
That's right. Yeah, we've been planning on it for some time, right? And so
Okay.
so yeah, definitely, I agree with you. I think we realized fairly early on that we needed to do this, and so the thing that we came to was having this interplay between both, and having ultimately, L2, L1, truthfully doesn't even matter. Right. What we're trying to build is an RWA ecosystem and have this embedded into Plume and embedded into all of crypto, and using the best tools at hand to
Mhm.
make that work. And today, I think it is a combination of both. So for sure. So we have both. We'll be talking a lot more about the L1 shortly. But yes, that's what it is.
And I like that approach because it's coming from a real need. Like you had this key insight that having our own chain will help us better serve our customers. And approaching it from that perspective versus just out of thin air, just creating an L1 for no reason. I think motivations matter. And I
Totally.
think the motivation that you guys are working from, is really from a customer need. And I think that's really admirable. Um, I noticed you were in Washington, D.C. A couple of weeks ago, and
Yes, yes.
the Genius Act passed yesterday.
That's right.
Tell us maybe your view on that and how the Genius Act potentially could, change RWA going forward.
Totally. Yeah, huge moment. I mean, I think it's hard to really encapsulate how like what's happening in words, without having seen it myself. And like you hear about it, you get a sense. But Teddy and I were fortunate to in our GC Solomon, who recently came. He was at the SEC before, and so we recently went to DC to meet with the crypto task force, to meet with Treasury. We put out some stuff yesterday. We actually got to meet Secretary Bessent and JD Vance and talk about these things as well, and talk about future of crypto in America and how these things are going to play out and how this goes. And I think it's always refreshing to not go there because you're getting a Wells notice, but because you're actually talking about how to do these things in tandem with the U.S. And the Stable Act or the Genius Act, excuse me, is is a huge part of it and a huge beginning piece of it. Right? I think it's multiple things together. I think the strategic reserve is one, the stabilized market structure. All these things kind of come together, really paint a story about where we're going, right? Which is allowing crypto to be a centerpiece in the U.S. And stable coins to be the starting point. I think it's one of the few places we've seen the government really begin to understand how to think about the future in not a regulatory capture first way, which is American dominance, right? The US dollar is an incredible product, right? And allowing that to flow through the stablecoins and to follow user behavior, right? And then to enable policy to kind of flow with that, I think is a really, really big deal. And when you talk to these folks, I think that was striking to me was I think they're very wary and cognizant of making sure that we are breeding an environment that enables competition, that favors new things versus protecting incumbents, right? And allowing new things to come to market. So I think it's just really hard to understand. And again, I sometimes forget how big of a change it is. Today, crypto is a $3 trillion asset class. It's just not that big, relatively speaking. And of that, two-thirds of it is BTC that just sits there and does nothing for the most part. Right. And so you're looking at about a third. So let's look at 1 trillion in assets today, right, in crypto. And it's this whole industry that we're all a part of, right? And I always say this, BlackRock alone is a $12 trillion asset manager. So one company is 12x all of those sort of movable assets within crypto, 4x all of crypto in one company. Right. And, in the US, we have hundreds of thousands of these companies, and so it's hard to really encapsulate when we allow that money flow to come in. We allow those users to come in. We allow them to interact in crypto. Like it's very hard to put into words how insane it's going to get, and where we are in the cycle. Like today, it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day mechanics of price and where things are. But if you zoom out just a little bit and just look at the broad dynamics, and it's the reason why I think crypto is exciting. It's the only area with alpha left, in my opinion. Like it's a very simple dynamic. There are very small amounts of stuff in crypto today. And the rules around this are all fucking sending in, more things in. It will only get bigger, and so you just have to get positioned and get ready for it and grit your teeth through it. Today, we've got all kinds of nonsense going on, war and tariffs and all kinds of stuff, and it creates a lot of short-term turbulence. But at the end of the day, I could not be more bullish where things are going with the Genius Act passing, right? With market structure around the corner, with the strategic reserve, all these things out there, it's very much signaling and, from my conversations, they're acting directly, and aggressively to make this happen, and thinking about this in a global way, right? Because I think the secondary effect, which has also been very prominent to see, right? Plume has always been a very global company as well, right? We have people in the Middle East and in Asia, all over the place. We work with these different geographies, right? And the thing that's happened with this is with America getting their act together around this and being more aggressive, all these other governments have really sprung into shape as well. Right. So you see Abu Dhabi, you see Dubai, which has always been on the leading edge of it, really also get very aggressive about it. Right. You see Hong Kong MA, you see Singapore MAS, right? You see these different areas and these different countries really start to push forward. The stablecoin bill in Hong Kong passed not that long ago, right? And so you're seeing all these things begin to happen in a very aggressive way, right? Because they're all trying to get to the ball first. And I think that's going to be huge. Like the sort of the confluence of all these things coming together it's hard to articulate like what's going to happen here. But, we're really turning on the spigot here. And that's going to just cause all kinds of stuff. When you combine that with the sort of open sort of innovation of crypto, a bunch of developers all around the world doing things, and a bunch of humans everywhere clicking buttons, and man, it's going to be nuts, and it's
Yeah.
going to be very, very positive.
And what role do you see Plume playing in that future world, going from 3 trillion asset class of crypto to
Totally.
whatever, maybe doubling or tripling in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're going to go much bigger than that, but I agree with you. Like, what do we play in this, right? Like, I think there's two ways to look at this. Number one is, I think a lot of people think there's going to be like one chain that rules it all, or like one dominant chain, right? And people tend to think that today, right? They're sort of like, there's Solana, there's this and this, and like it's like a handful of things, right? My view is this, whereas like I think you're going to hundreds of thousands of millions of chains in the future, and it's going to be everywhere, right? And how do we want to, where do we want to be in that? We want to help enable this future to be in there. We want to be somewhere in between both. We are people, our whole company are people that come from crypto, right? So we understand the nature and we understand what's going on in crypto and how to build products for the crypto audience. That's why today, if you look at RWA XYZ, we've been out for a little bit less than 2 weeks on mainnet. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we flipped Ethereum as like 2 or 3 days ago as the number one holder, the number one chain for RWA holders right out there. So, Ethereum has about 70,000. I think we have 95,000 now. And number three is 7,000. And then after that, it drops down tremendously. So because we've designed this way and we understand what the crypto user wants, we're able to actually get people to use these products and hold these products, right? And so when you think about that, that's what we want to do, is help the real world understand how to design things for crypto versus trying to mold crypto to the real world, right? And so that's a mix of regulation and helping them shape policy. That's why we have Salman and RGC, who comes from the SEC, comes from Chainalysis, comes from Uniswap, who knows how to do these things, right? Number one, I guess building great products, right? Being international in that sense, right? And I think number three is then not just working on our own ecosystem. Our own ecosystem is meant to bootstrap these things, but then also working with every other ecosystem to help get these assets in the right place. It's very, very early still for most people. I think, like you said, most people don't even know what RWAs are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that applies to crypto people and applies to the crypto builders in RWAs a lot of times. It's still very early. People are just figuring out the contours of RWAs are not the same as crypto. So how do you put these things together to build protocols that work for both? There's still a lot to do there, and that's where we want to come into play as a constituent that understands both sides favorable. I can go to Capitol Hill, but I can also, I can be in Discord and TG, aping shitters with the rest of them, and the idea is to be able to do both and thread the needle to really bring this all together.
You alluded to a chart that you shared on your Twitter.
Yes.
So the RWA holders, as of June 16th, 2 days ago, there were 79,159 RWA holders.
Yes.
Maybe what does that mean for like the layperson versus
Totally.
like
So
what is an RWA holder?
yes, totally. Look, when we talk about holders today, when we talk about adoption, right, for RWAs on chain today, I think a lot of people talk about dollars, right,
Mm-hmm.
which is how many dollars are flowing into this ecosystem, right, and how many RWAs are here, right. Now, the thing about dollars is this: it doesn't map to adoption at all. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's a proxy, right? But you can have, and we know this with crypto, you can have one person spin up 100 wallets and dump $100 million into these assets. And now it
Mm-hmm.
looks like $100 million, right, on chain, but it's still one person, right? And so it's a mixture of these. None of these things are perfect metrics, just to be clear, right? But it's a mixture and a combination. It's both dollars, but utility and wallets and transactions. You look at all those things. And I think for us, it's going to evolve as well. The first phase of what we care about Plume is number of holders. One, we got to get these products into the hands of people. Number two, then make them use them in the right way and help them understand. Number three is to get builders to then build with them. So there's multiple phases. We're in the first one right now, right? And so the intention by building this network and customizing the ecosystem to fit this way is to get real RWAs in the hands of users today, right? Most people in crypto do not hold RWAs, right, at all. They're holding ETH, BTC. They're holding crypto native assets. They're not actually holding. If you factor out the stablecoin as an example, right? The stablecoin definitely has great adoption. But RWAs, T-bills, CLOs, mineral vault, whatever, like all these things out there, right? All of that alone, there are no holders. So if you go to that same chart and go to RWXYZ and click through, everyone is just holding T-bills. You've got 2,000, and it's a surprising number. Every single chain somehow has 2,000 people holding T-bills, and so it just smells a little strange. Versus us, I think the idea is to have a plurality of people, right, using this thing, small, large, and all kinds of assets, not just T-bills, right? You've got T-bills, but we have mineral vaults, right? I mean, one of our projects, Mineral Vault, tweeted out yesterday, there are 600,000 holders of oil royalties in America, right? And on chain in 2 weeks now, we've got 40,000 now. So
That's
almost
great.
10%, right? And so that's just
Yeah.
the beginning of how this can evolve. And that's why this is exciting. And so, today on Plume already, we've got people holding private credit. You've got people holding mineral vaults. You've got people holding CLO funds. You've got people holding PayFi instruments, right? And doing arbitrage between these different places. And so you have all these different products that people are holding, right? Because we were able to customize the experience to what people are used to doing on chain, right? It's not just TradFi on chain where you're doing the same thing. You log into a portal, you got a KYC. It's not that, right? It's the same experience that we used to. Go there, stake stables, earn yield, right? And if you want to, take that with you and do something else. Go into Morpho, which is also on Plume, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go there and take out a loan against it. Do something else. Or loop against it if you want, right? All these things are possible. Or go to Satori or WooFi or Perps dexes and use it as collateral, right? And then go take out a position somewhere else. But this way, you're always able to hold and rotate in and out of these things in a very simple, easy, and accessible way, right? And so that's why I think it matters. And that's why I care about these holder numbers, is because if we've done the experience right, then people will come in. You and I both know this. I used to work in Web2 as a PM, right? And as a product manager. And every single click is a huge drop off, right,
Yeah.
in adoption, right? And the number one thing that really ruins adoption is KYC, and these like onerous forms and all this stuff. So if the bar to actually use any RWAs is you have to have $5 million liquid, and you got to sit through a 2 hour like process to get on chain, right? To sort of qualify and get your KYC up, like you're going to lose 99% of the world.
Hmm.
And so that's the intention for us, is to mold these products in the way that crypto can consume. I think we've been really excited and glad to see that. I think we've struck that, at least, in the beginning. Now we, again, I think we're at 90,000 plus today. We're going to cross 100 by the weekend, I'm sure, and so, that means if we look at the number of RWA holders in totality on chain, will be over half will just be on Plume alone, right? And
Yeah.
then the rest scattered across 100 networks, And so to me, that's the important thing. If we want to focus on adoption and usage, then we have to start with the number of holders and who's doing what, right? And the reason why adoption usage is important is this, is ultimately what you're trying to do for the asset issuer, right? And if you want to bring great products on chain, make them useful, because there's an adverse selection issue, right? Historically, bringing things on chain have always been the worst products. You couldn't find money, you couldn't do it in the real world, right? So you brought it here. That's why the last cycle was all a bunch of nonsense, like things that would just bad deals or whatever, right? It was like things that you couldn't get, right? Like that people didn't want, so they tried to shill it here, right? Now, if you want good products to come here to make use of it, you need to provide value to those businesses, right? Like it's very simple, right? If I'm BlackRock, the reason I'm deploying Biddle and my money market fund on chain, right, is because I want to access new customers. I want to grow my AUM. I want to have new flows. I want to make money in new ways and access
Yeah.
and reach new people, right? And so that's the first step, right? If sure, BlackRock can say, look, we got $100 million from XYZ chain, right? But it's one user that sits there and does nothing. It's just not enough. They don't care, right? For us, it's really about how do we show them that you can access a whole new set of people, and do it in interesting and new ways that they couldn't do before.
Yeah.
That to me is how we really build the flywheel.
Now, on the site, and I think this is probably related. And by the way, I agree with you. It's like getting those holders is super key, and is one of the more important metrics, I think, in the RWA space. Another one that I'm looking at is under ecosystem on plume.org. You have
Yep.
200 plus partners, with some of
Yes.
the biggest names in both crypto and TradFi. So Nest, Ondo, which is highly respected on Wall Street, Superstate, Centrifuge, Mercado Bitcoin, Paxos, Layer Zero. Tell us from their perspective, Anchorage Digital, why would they work with Plume?
Totally. I think it comes down to this. I think one, ultimately, it's focus,
Mm-hmm.
right? For each of these folks, um, we are focused on this area, right? Which means, how does that manifest itself? It ultimately leads to distribution. That's kind of what we focus on, right? We make it easy for people to get these products in the hands of other people, right? I think we're still in phase one of this, where people are just used to big capital commits, right? But again, this number proves and shows how we can get these people out here, right? It's like you can actually get people to hold this and build your customer base, right? And build a user base for this thing, right? And so so each of these constituents have different reasons as to why. Layer Zero has its own reasons. Right? Like they really, we believe in a blockchain future as well, a sort of chain abstracted future, really, despite us building multiple blockchains, right? We think
Mm-hmm.
that's going to disappear, right? So working with them is for a reason. Anchorage, providing customers and their holders some way to access differentiated yields is the whole thing, right? And so, and other networks, like Superstate, is for them to reach different products, right? Superstate today, right, has a few holders, right? But through us, we've embedded Superstate products, both their basis product and the T-bill product, into our vaults. So, through our N Alpha Vault today, which is a combination of things, which includes a Superstate product, right? T-bill product, we've got over 30,000 holders. And so now they've got, 30,000 holders of that product, in a way that they haven't done before. So they really distribute that much more broadly, right, to get out there. So that's the reason why that we have and we're able to work with these folks. I think there's many to come. We don't take it for granted. We're very grateful that we get to work with them and learn from them as well. I think, just like I said, I think crypto, especially RWAs, is not a zero sum business, right? So we're really focused on continuing to grow all of this and working in tandem, learning with them and building new things together. So
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot to do here, and we're grateful to get a chance to do it.
We've talked about the various audiences, right? So you've got the traders on the one side, you've got the for lack of a better term, kind of a backroom operations
Yep.
where you tokenize real world assets, get it on chain, which is really a very complicated process. And then you've got these partners that offers, to a degree, you've kind of whitelisted these partners on the Plume site so that traders can have access to their products.
Yep.
Um, it, how do you think about the crypto community that does not fit in any of these pockets? They're just big fans of Plume. Maybe they own the token, but they're not necessarily participants in any of the areas that I've already described. How do you think
Totally.
about them, and how do they play in the kind of a, I don't know how to describe it, but I guess what's their role in the ecosystem?
Totally. I mean, a couple things. Everyone has a huge role to play in all of this, and so I think you don't have to be interacting on chain to hold these assets to be a big part of it. There are multiple dimensions to doing this, right? Because look, what we're talking about is transforming capital markets and transforming a lot of the real world, right?
Yeah,
Um, and bring it on chain. It's a tremendous amount of stuff to do across everything, across education, across go to market, across brand building, across this, and even just like simple user feedback and experience. Like all these things matter. So
yeah,
sure, building on Plume is something we appreciate, and we respect and love all people building with us, right? Infrastructure is great, users are great, cap providers, asset issuers, all of that is great, right? You're just holding the Plume token, it's also great, right? Because the Plume token is also meant to be a microcosm of the ecosystem, right? And so we are embedding a bunch of the features and things that happen within Plume into the token as well, right? So being along for that journey and helping us design that as a group, right, is also super, super important. And over time, using the token, like I said, with the L1, there's a bunch of stuff coming around staking, around validating, around all these things that are coming as well, right? And providing security to these things that also super useful. So just by simply holding and staking, it's actually adding a lot of value to the network as well, right? And then even that, just being around, just look again, like I think again, we are probably one of the few that are open to many others that like quote unquote are alongside us, right? Meaning, people talking about RWAs and learning about it and sharing it and just engaging and experiencing stuff. Like to me, that's enough, you know. And so to me, that is the point. And like that's how people can engage and participate with us. Like I think asking us questions, talking about what's going on, throwing out ideas, calling out things that are not great, calling things that should be better, or whatever. Like all those things contribute and help, and we take all of it in stride, and we're very grateful for anyone to even give a shit, and participate and help. And then so there's multiple layers to it. There's that. Going deeper is holding the token, going deeper is bridging in, going deeper is building, right? Then it's like evangel. All these things are just one part of one part of a funnel that we all work together on. And so every single part, we value, and I think there's multiple ways to do it. And again, then it would be Plume. I think of it as a way of like we are. Plume is focused on RWAs, and so a big part of the story is growing RWAs in totality. It's not about just growing Plume, right? I think building anything, and this, right? Like building anything is about picking the right markets, right? And picking the right areas and making sure that it's a rising tide. A rising tide lifts all boats, And so for us, it's about making sure that we grow this whole market and everybody wins,
yeah,
versus just talking about Plume all day. So anyone, whether you're bullish on other RWA stuff or us or whatever, like I think we're grateful to have it all. And all of that is contributing positively to everything we're doing here.
yeah. So what keeps you grounded? Because you're building something real. You're doing something incredibly hard, working with the TradFi world to tokenize assets, make those tokenized assets tradable on Plume, working with these, ecosystem partners, which are all building their own ecosystems, but then, working with them so that their products are available to traders and users of Plume. Like you're building something real for the long term. Um, how do you stay grounded and focus on the long term? And how do you balance that with, hype cycles, and crypto is very hype driven.
Yes.
How do you balance things?
Probably not well is the real answer. Like I'm probably all over the place, and I'm like definitely, I'd be lying if I said I didn't like feed into the hype cycle and like live into it. I'm definitely around it for sure. And we understand it. I think to me the thing that really keeps us grounded and keeps me grounded, right, are having conversations both like this, but also like it's just when we're on Capitol Hill not that long ago, like really getting to sit there and just bask in the bigger picture and
Mhm.
really understand where we're going, right? Which is we are not even 1% of the way there yet, and it's already getting nuts. Like it's already getting there. We haven't even begun, and it's going to go absolute nuclear when it hits. I think that is like, okay, cool. Like, let's not get distracted by up and down this or that or whatever's going on. Let's stay laser focused on the future and what we're actually building on, because if we do even a tenth of what we're saying we're going to do, it's going to be astronomical for everything, right? And I'm not just like for the whole industry, right? And so like I think to me that's what we stay focused on, which is like, look, we got into this because we're committed to growing crypto and growing this whole ecosystem and growing this market, and we believe that RWAs are a conduit for that. And seeing all these things come together just furthers the conviction. And we've seen all of our other partners get hyper bullish on this. Like 2 years ago when we started this, nobody gave a shit about RWAs. Nobody cared. I couldn't get anyone to pay attention. And today everyone seems to be doing RWAs, right? And so that's kind of how it goes. It comes and goes in waves, and I think you play into it as much as you can, right? When the market's up and when people are hyped about it, you lean into it if you can, right? When things are down, you try to ignore it, not let it bother you, and just do your thing. And I think constantly just zooming out to focus on the North Star, the big picture, which is if we zoom out just a little bit, not even that much crypto, that's just a surprising. There's a rare form of ADD that's circles of crypto crowd too. But you just can't remember anything past 10 days, or like even a couple hours, And so like you have to fight that and focus on like, the long term in a regular world is like 5-10 years. I think we're talking 2-3 max here, and it's still going to. So we just focus on the long term here. 2-3 years out, it's going to go crazy. Like it's just inevitably having every country in the world is starting to tokenize. Every big company started to tokenize. End users are asking and trying to hold these things. Stable coins are going nuclear. And that's the first RWA that really mattered. And so to me, like all the signs are there. You just have to stay focused and stay grounded and like hold on for the ride. It's very much like the quote from I think Marissa. I think they told this to Marissa when she joined Google, which is like, it's not about wearing the rocket ship. You just got to hold on. Like as long as you hold on, you'll be fine. And it's easy to get distracted and get caught up in little things here and there. And it happens to everyone. It happens to me. But focusing on the big picture, I think we're able to stay locked in and focus on where we're going, just because the size of the opportunity is just something to behold. So
yeah. On that note, what inning? If there are 9 innings in a baseball game, what inning are we in? You think?
I think we have not even started one. Honestly,
Really?
I think we're
We're
just.
that
I think we're
early?
practicing. I would have said 2 or 3 before.
Mhm.
I would have said inning 2 or 3. Perhaps getting halfway through. Nearing that 20-30% of the way. After going to meet the regulators, after going to meet people all around the world and talking to these people in more depth and seeing the bigger picture. We're not just talking about tokenizing, we're talking about changing the landscape of how capital markets work across the entire world, right? That we've barely begun, and it's happening. The stablecoin thing is a foundational piece, right? And even the stablecoin game is still early. Like it's still not a thing. It's very clear stablecoins are going to be the future, and so that's a foundational piece to everything. So I don't even think we've begun. And that's why I think it's very helpful, just like, okay, like let's focus, because if we hit inning 1, it's going to sing, let alone inning 9, like it's hard to really, really internalize it. So I think we're so early that people just don't see it. And it's easy in hindsight. I think we're looking at, if we compare this to the internet, we're looking at the first versions of the internet where you're still just reading research papers on an ASCII screen, it's
Yeah.
black and green text, and you're just sending research papers to each other in a library. That's where we are. Right.
Mm.
The idea today that everyone's got a phone and all of the world's information is in one place. I push a button and anything in the world gets delivered to me, right, through the internet. It's just not something that was comprehensible before, right? I think that's where we are. We don't even know where this is going to go. I think anyone who tells you is lying and full of shit. We have no idea what's going to happen, but we do know that all the signs are coming together in an incredible way. And so we're just so early, and I think it's easy. Again, it's easy to get caught up in numbers, and price and candles. But the future's around here.
Well, Chris, you've lived up to your name. You certainly are one of the best door-to-door salesmen of RWA Fi. And I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and educating us on real-world assets and what Plume is doing. I'll be sure to share all the URLs and other pertinent information in the show notes. Any final words you'd like to share with the audience before we get off?
No, I mean, first off, thanks for anyone who's been paying attention to listening, give us a chance, like you said, knocking on doors, someone has to answer, if you're doing that. So like, I think that's the first thing. And thanks to you and your community, your audience for having us. I think that's one. I think the second thing, and the thing I'll leave with is, mainnet's out there for us right now. Right. And, I think people see mainnet as the endpoint for a lot of people. It's a starting point for us. There's a lot more to come here. Right. And so I think for us, we are building a community, an ecosystem. Right. It's not a chain. We have a chain, of course, but we're building an ecosystem. That's what we're trying to do here. And that's everybody. That's people who are just curious. It's builders. It's marketing people. It is people who want to join. It's all these things. Right. And so every dimension, right, I think we are building, a way for us all to come together and work. And if anyone's interested and curious and everything. I've been very heads down the last couple of months, just getting in and out the door, and a couple of things happen, of course, since I've been busy. But we're back in the streets now, and like I really am focused on it. So any questions, comments, ping me anytime. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Telegram, right? Our company website, plume.org, is there. Join our community, right? And just, get involved and say whatever you want. We're open to anything. And so, we're very much about shepherding this innovation to everybody. Yeah. And I think the best comes from bottoms up, from people who just want to do things. So we want to build an ecosystem level where that is allowed and possible. So find us on Twitter, find us online, find us in our channels and our Discord and all that, and ping us anytime when it was around.
Well, you guys are doing very exciting things, and excited for what you guys have coming up and for the vision that you've shared. We're not even inning one yet, and we're still very, very early in the game. And I can see Plume playing a really important role in helping crypto move forward into, multiple trillions in market cap. So thank you.
100%. Love it. Thanks so much for having us. Appreciate it.